Everyone's already hyped it up, and I'm sure you're all anticipating the power creep. Dan Heng Imbibitor Lunae is an imaginary hypercarry that eats loads of SP. He's quite restrictive in his team building, but once you start feeding this dragon, destruction is soon to follow. I've always said that Dan Heng was one of the best F2P units, and now he's going to be the best whale unit as well. I'll tackle relic builds, teams, and much more. I've plotted out the chapters so you can click around to get to the part you need most. So let's talk about Dan Heng's kit. Dan Heng's bread and butter is eating 3 SP for his skill Dracore Libre, so he can unleash his absurd skill multipliers. It is a steep cost with a ridiculous payoff. You want to be able to use 2 to 3 skill points on him every turn because he gains stacks of dominating roar when you do. And these stacks increases his crit damage for that turn. And it also activates his talent, Righteous Heart, which also increases his damage percent. But there is some breathing room for your team to use skills when Dan Heng uses his ultimate, Azur's Aqua Ablutes All, since it gives him 2 stacks of Squam Sacrosanta. Think of these as emergency food. I mean skill points that you can only use for Dan Heng. Since his crit damage and damage percent buffs only last until the end of Dan Heng's turn, you'd want to use his ultimate right after you attack with Fulgurant Leap, so your buffs are still applied. Due to his high SP consumption and high multipliers, it's best to play Dan Heng as a hyper carry and have lots of SP positive units on your team. Now let's move on to his light cones. Dan Heng's best light cone is his signature, Brighter Than the Sun, not only because of the raw stats it brings, but also the energy regeneration it brings that helps his rotation a little bit. But I recommend you use S5 on the Fall of an Eon through the Hertistor since it matches the damage quite closely, and the only real edge Brighter Than the Sun has is through the energy regeneration. Under the Blue Sky is the only 4-star I can recommend, since Dan Heng can't really maximize the other 4 stars quite as well. Though if you don't have high super impositions on it, running S5 Collapsing Sky would be better. But honestly, just use those Hertabonds, man. Now, onto his rotations. His 2-point and 3-point enhanced basics generates 35 and 40 energy respectively, and Dan Heng's max energy is 140. This means that Dan Heng takes 4 turns to ult no matter if you 2-point or 3-point. Your standard rotation alternates between 2-point and 3 points depending if you need skill points for your team to sustain or support. But if you have Ting Yun and you use 3 points twice, you'd have 135. So this means that you need to get that 5 energy from QPQ, Shared Feeling, killing a unit, or getting hit. Since Dan Heng is a destruction character now, there's more of a chance for him to get hit due to his aggro value being 125 from the usual 75 and 100 that most of the cast have. With this, you can pull off a 2-turn ult rotation, but of course, Ting Yun does have a 3-turn or 4-turn ult rotation, so you wouldn't be doing this every time. Now, let's talk about his relics. For his relic sets, I suggest you build 4-piece Wastelander of Banditry Desert if you've got debuffers in your team. This is the best set for Dan Heng in terms of damage, but it's quite conditional. If you don't want to run debuffers in your team, or if you want consistency, then you can run 4-piece Musketeer of Wildweed for solid stat lines. You can also run 2 pieces of both. For the planar set, I still shill Space Sealing Station due to its flexibility, but Rutilant Arena is great for Dan Heng if you can hit the gate of 70% crit rate since it increases his basic attack's damage. As usual, you want to run crit on his body, attack percent or speed on his boots, attack percent or imaginary damage percent on his sphere, and attack percent on his rope. For substats, you should aim to maximize crit rate and damage, and you can pick up attack percent and speed substats along the way. Are you crazy? Speed boots? Yes? And yes, if your team can handle it, you can still run speed boots on Dan Heng and aim for 134 speed, but only do this if your team is on par with his speed and if you can 0 cycle the first wave. Even if he is skill point hungry, you still want at least some speed due to the amounts of slows and action value debuffs that enemies have in MOC. Of course, the age-old question of speed versus attack boots are entirely dependent on your substats. And remember that you don't need to hit 134 speed if you can't even 0 cycle the first wave. For the attack sphere, Dan Heng already gets quite a lot of damage percent boost from his talent. Because of that, you can get diminishing returns from using an imaginary damage percent sphere. Both imaginary damage percent and attack percent have a very small difference between one another, so I suggest that you just go with whichever relic rolled better. But of course, there is a bit of nuance. If you roll loads of attack percent substats, or if you have attack percent buffers on your team like Asta, then imaginary damage percent will be better. For team building, I suggest you load them up with harmonies and nihilities that can go SP positive. Ting Yun is great on Dan Heng, since she gives attack percent, damage percent, and most importantly, energy to one unit, which is perfect for Dan Heng's HYPERCARRY playstyle. She allows Dan Heng to do a 2-turn ult rotation, which frees up more SP for the rest of your units, due to Dan Heng generating Squamous Sacrosanta. Yukong is usually SP neutral or negative, but you can run a 4-turn ult rotation on her and use her skill and ult just in time for Dan Heng's ultimate. You just need S5 meshing cogs or memories of the past and an energy regen rope on her to make this work. She's decent since she boosts imaginary damage percent and has a fat attack percent, crit rate, and damage percent boost. But you're only ever going to see them once every 4 turns. I suggest against it, but if you want the full Imagine Dragons meme team, go for it. Pela, as usual, is great due to her AoE def percent shred and debuff cleanse. I have a feeling you'll be hearing me talk about Pela being great in every single video at this point. Asta can work if you've got an SP positive rotation through either meshing cogs or memories of the past and E1. She generates a team-wide attack percent buff, which could be useful if someone else scales off attack percent in your team like Locha. Honestly, Asta's main value is her team-wide speed buff, but she kinda needs fire weakness if you want to be able to run her, so she might be more trouble than she's worth in Dan Heng's teams. But there are definitely times where she can shine in them. Wealth is usually SP negative and it's a little hard to run with Dan Heng, but if you have an energy regen rope, you can do a 1 skill, 3 basic rotation. Wealth's good for applying debuffs and imprisons if you have Dan Heng on the Wastelander set, and Wealth offers a bit of utility with its slows and vulnerability application. Silverwolf works fine with Dan Heng if you've got a bunch of imaginary units alongside you. She can make your enemies weak to imaginary, and she's got an assortment of nasty debuffs and a death shred to top it off. She's SP positive as long as she doesn't troll you and roll quantum on her skill. But honestly, if you've got Silverwolf, just roll for Fu Xuan and get that Mono Quantum Dream team going. In my opinion, the best F2P team for Dan Heng is Pela and Ting Yun, due to them being great at E0 and having a low investment floor to be effective. Dan Heng's premier team is still Ting Yun and the upcoming character Hanabi, who generates skill points, and Huo Huo, that generates energy. But that's looking too far into the future. Currently, it's not that much different from his F2P team, as you could just replace Pela with Wealth for maximum banditry value. But even then, Pela's Death Shred is still a force to be reckoned with. For the age-old question of Light Cone versus E1, his Light Cone's main pull is that it allows him to pull off his rotation smoothly and secures that you have enough energy if you're running Ting Yun for the 2-turn rotation, since his rotation with her will leave him 5 energy short. If you want consistency, go get his Light Cone. His E1 offers quite a significant damage boost from his talent. On the fall of an Eon matches it quite closely in damage, so I suggest you pull for E2 instead. Yes, you heard me right. You should pull for E2. This is because his E2 and E6 are game-breaking. Dan Heng has a lot of rerun value, and I think it's honestly worth to save your pulls for an entire year to get his E6 because it's just that good. When he uses his ultimate, his next action is advanced by 100%. This gives him another turn after he ults. Then he'll get an extra turn every time Ting Yun's ult is up. And I know the Sila simps are saying that you need E2 to match Sila, but you need to keep in mind that Dan Heng's AoE and absurd skill multipliers more than make up for having extra turns gated behind Eidolons. E2 is a good stopping point for most players because E6 takes 540 more pulls at maximum. But if you're saving for his rerun as an F2P, then you can definitely do it. The main reason why his E6 is broken because it gives him 20% imaginary respen on his attack every time an ally ults. Up to 60 respen. If you're new to Hoyoverse games, a similar concept came up with Raiden Shogun, where she ignored up to 60% of the target's def, which allowed you to pretty much clear all the content solo. Sure, this is a weaker version of it that requires allies, and it's gated behind E6, but it's still broken. Stacking stats like attack percent, crit percent, and damage percent have diminishing returns, and respen gives you a new avenue of multiplicative damage. If you're not a total numbers nerd, Just trust me, bro. For now, I really do suggest you pull for E2 S1 and go pull for other units. I think his E6 is busted, but you're aiming to pull for Hanabi and Wohuo later anyway. For the conclusion, overall, Dan Heng at E0 is a solid hypercarry unit, though you may have to get used to eating lots of skill points on one character. Due to his Eidolons, he's got a lot of rerun value compared to most other 5 stars, and I think it's worth considering pulling his E2 if you like him. At E0, I'd say he's an A tier, and his other Eidolons allow him to steamroll MOC with no problem. I'd even consider shooting him up to ridiculous imaginary tiers such as S tier. As an avid League enjoyer, you can rest assured that Dan Heng won't be power crept anytime soon. There are no other 5-star imaginary DPSs that will be released in at least 4 months, and only Skrulum looks to be the next imaginary DPS unit. But from what I've seen so far, he's a follow-up spamming erudition unit, so they serve different niches anyway. That's it for me, my name is Kite, and I'll see you when Fu Xuan releases. Oh, and I'll most likely stream or upload my Dan Heng and Fu Xuan pulls across 3 accounts. Be there, subscribe. Thanks.